The street was almost empty, the kind of quiet that only exists late at night when most of the city has gone to sleep. Street lights cast long amber reflections on the damp asphalt, stretching shadows that seemed to move even when nothing else did. Her car rolled steadily through the intersection, speed measured, signals clean, no music playing. She liked the quiet. It gave her space to think. Then the flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Red. Blue. Red again. Sharp and sudden, cutting through the calm like a warning she hadn't asked for. She exhaled slowly, already rehearsing what she knew she would do next. Turn signal on. Smooth pull to the shoulder. Engine off. Window down halfway. Both hands placed clearly on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed but visible. She had done this before. Too many times. Footsteps crunched behind her, slow and deliberate. A flashlight beam swept across the back seat, lingered on the dashboard, then landed on her face. The light stayed there longer than necessary. Evening, a voice said, flat and unimpressed. License and registration. She nodded, moving carefully. No sudden gestures. No irritation in her tone. Of course. She retrieved the documents and handed them over. May I ask why I was stopped? The officer didn't answer right away. He glanced at the paperwork, then at her, then back again, as if something didn't quite line up in his mind. You'll find out, he said finally. A second figure leaned against the patrol car behind him, arms crossed, watching the exchange with casual interest. He chuckled softly. You're calm, he said. Most people aren't this calm. I follow the law, she replied. There's nothing to be nervous about. That earned a smirk. Uh-huh. The first officer shined the flashlight into the car again, slower this time, pausing on the empty passenger seat, the back, the trunk release. This your vehicle? He asked. Yes. You sure? She met his eyes evenly. I am. He handed the documents back but didn't step away. Instead, his posture shifted, shoulders squaring as if he'd decided something. Step out of the vehicle. Her heart rate ticked up, but her expression didn't change. Am I being detained? The second officer laughed openly now. Listen to her. Sounds like she's been watching lawyer shows. She opened the door and stepped out anyway. The night air was cool, brushing against her coat. She stood tall, feet planted, hands at her sides where they could be seen. The officers were close now, too close, their presence filling the space around her. Traffic slowed as a car passed by, the driver glancing over, curiosity sparked by the scene. Another car followed, then another. The quiet street was beginning to pay attention. Hands behind your back, the first officer said. For what reason? She asked calmly. For resisting, he snapped, irritation flashing across his face. You want to make this harder than it has to be? I'm asking questions, she said. That isn't resistance. The second officer shook his head, amused. Every time, he muttered. Always gotta turn it into something. Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. I'd like to know what law I've broken. The flashlight clicked off. The officer stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. You're being real mouthy for someone who should be grateful we're just doing our jobs. I respect the law, she said. That's why I expect it to be followed. A small crowd was forming now. A couple stood across the street, pretending to check their phones while clearly watching. Someone leaned out of a nearby parked car, recording discreetly. The air felt heavier, charged. Turn around, the officer ordered. She didn't move. Not yet. Before I do that, she said, I'd like your badge number. The second officer barked a laugh. Oh, this is rich. You writing a complaint tonight? Yes, she said simply. Something shifted. The amusement drained from their faces, replaced by annoyance edged with something sharper. The first officer's hand hovered near his belt. You think anyone's gonna take your word over ours? He said quietly. You think that little notebook's gonna save you? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just reached slowly into her coat pocket. Both officers stiffened. "Hey!" one snapped. "What are you doing?" "Taking out my phone," she said. "I'm making a call." There was a pause. A long one. Then a shrug. "Go ahead," the first officer said. "Make all the calls you want." She dialed with calm precision. When she spoke, her voice was low but clear, every word deliberate. She gave the location. Described the stop. Mentioned the officer's conduct. She didn't dramatize. She didn't plead. She simply reported. When she ended the call, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up at them. The night seemed quieter again, as if the street itself was holding its breath. The officers exchanged a glance. The second one shifted his weight, suddenly less relaxed. "Who'd you call?" he asked. "Someone who needed to know," she replied. The first officer scoffed, but his confidence wavered. "You trying to scare us?" "No," she said. "I'm documenting." Minutes passed. No cuffs. No orders. Just waiting. The flashing lights continued to pulse, but their rhythm felt different now, less dominant, more exposed. A black SUV turned onto the street in the distance, headlights steady, purposeful. She watched it approach, her expression unreadable. The officers noticed it too. Their posture changed. The smirks disappeared. The second officer straightened, eyes narrowing. The SUV slowed as it drew closer. And then it stopped behind the patrol car. No siren. No announcement. Just presence. A door opened. Someone stepped out. And in that moment, the balance of the night began to tilt. The SUV idled behind the patrol car, engine humming low, headlights washing over the backs of the officers. For a few seconds, no one moved. The streetlights flickered faintly, and the onlookers across the road leaned forward without realizing they were doing it, sensing that something had shifted even if they didn't yet know what. The first officer cleared his throat and glanced over his shoulder, irritation flashing across his face. "Stay where you are," he said to her, the edge in his voice sharper now, less casual. He took a step away, as if to assert control, then hesitated. The SUV didn't intervene. It didn't honk or flash lights. It simply waited. She remained still, hands visible, posture calm. Inside, she could feel the familiar tension pressing against her ribs, the quiet calculation that came from years of knowing how quickly situations like this could spiral. But she also knew something else. Every word spoken, every gesture made, was now part of a record that extended far beyond this street. The second officer broke the silence with forced laughter. "Probably just someone lost," he said, a little too loudly. "People love rubbernecking." The first officer nodded as if he believed it. He turned back to her. "All right," he said, tone changing again, trying on authority like armor. "We're gonna do this the easy way. Turn around." "For what reason?" she asked again, evenly. He frowned. "You're obstructing an investigation." "By standing still?" she asked. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone whispered, "She's not doing anything." A phone lifted higher, no longer discreet. The officer's jaw tightened. "You want to argue law with me on the side of the road?" he snapped. "You think you know better?" "I know my rights," she replied. "And I'm exercising them calmly." That word, calmly, seemed to irritate him more than defiance would have. He stepped closer again, close enough that she could smell coffee and something metallic on his breath. "Funny thing about rights," he said quietly. "People always think they got more than they do." The second officer shifted, glancing back at the SUV again. The driver's door remained closed. Whoever was inside wasn't rushing. That unsettled him. A car passed slowly, driver craning their neck. Another stopped at the corner longer than necessary. The street was no longer empty. It was watching. "Look," the second officer said, trying a different approach. "We just want to make sure everything's good here. You cooperate, this ends fast." "I have been cooperating," she said. I stopped. I answered your questions. I followed every instruction. Except when you didn't, the first officer shot back. She tilted her head slightly. Asking why I'm being detained isn't refusal. The silence that followed felt stretched thin. The officer's hand hovered again, uncertain. The authority he expected to feel wasn't there anymore. It had leaked away, replaced by scrutiny. Across the street, someone spoke up. Why are you doing this to her? Mind your business. The second officer snapped, pointing. Keep moving. The bystander didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The SUV's engine cut off. That small sound landed heavier than any siren. The officers both turned now, fully, eyes locked on the darkened vehicle. The door still hadn't opened, but the message was clear. Someone was paying attention, and they weren't impressed. The first officer exhaled sharply and turned back to her. You want to tell me why that car's here? I already told you, she said. I made a call. To who? He demanded. Someone who expects professionalism, she replied. The second officer scoffed again, but his laugh cracked halfway through. You think you're special? He said. You think one phone call makes you untouchable? No, she said. I think accountability applies to everyone. A supervisor's voice echoed faintly from the radio clipped to the first officer's shoulder. Static. A question. He ignored it. Turn around, he repeated, louder this time, as if volume could restore control. She didn't move. Her refusal wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply there, immovable, rooted in certainty. That unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Phones were fully out now. No one was hiding it. The red and blue lights reflected off screens, capturing angles the officers couldn't see. You're making a scene, the first officer said. She met his gaze. You did that the moment you chose to escalate. The word hung in the air. Escalate. The second officer stepped back, lowering his voice. This isn't going how it's supposed to, he muttered. The first officer shot him a look. We're fine. But he wasn't sure. Not anymore. The SUV door opened. A man stepped out slowly, dressed in a dark suit, movements controlled, purposeful. He didn't speak yet. He didn't rush. He simply stood, observing. The officer stiffened. Who's that? The second officer whispered. I don't know, the first said, but his confidence was gone now, replaced by calculation. The suited man didn't approach them. He looked at her first, assessing, concerned. Then he looked at the officers. He took in the scene, the bystanders, the phones, the tension, like someone used to weighing consequences. The first officer swallowed. Can we help you? He called out. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his own phone. The street felt suddenly very small. The officer's radio crackled again, louder this time. A voice asked for a status update. He didn't respond. She watched quietly, heart steady, knowing the hardest part was almost over, not because she was safe yet, but because the truth was close enough now to be impossible to ignore. The suited man finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying. Is there a reason this stop is still ongoing? The first officer hesitated. Active investigation, he said weakly. The man nodded slowly, as if filing that away. I see. He looked back at her. You all right? She nodded once. That was all it took. The officers exchanged another glance, fear now visible beneath the bravado. They were no longer in control of the narrative. The street had turned into a courtroom without walls, and every witness was recording. The man in the suit stepped forward one pace. Let's slow this down, he said. And for the first time that night, the officers realized the situation was no longer escalating in their favor. It was closing in on them. The air felt different now, heavier but clearer, like the moment before a storm breaks. The suited man stood between the SUV and the patrol car, not blocking anyone, not asserting himself physically, yet somehow anchoring the entire scene. His presence alone seemed to pull the chaos inward, forcing everything to slow down. The first officer straightened, forcing his shoulders back. "Sir, this is an active stop," he said, trying to sound official. "I'm going to need you to step back." The man didn't move. He didn't raise his voice either. "I asked a simple question," he replied. "Why is this stop still ongoing?" The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced briefly at his partner, who looked anything but confident now. Phones were still raised around them, tiny red lights blinking as recordings continued. There was no privacy left, no room to rewrite what had already happened. "She was being uncooperative," the first officer said finally. The man's eyes shifted to her. "Is that accurate?" She answered calmly. "I followed every instruction given to me. I asked for clarification when orders weren't explained." The suited man nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. "And you asked for badge numbers?" "Yes." The second officer scoffed weakly. "That's not illegal, but it upset you," the man finished, turning his gaze to him. The interruption wasn't aggressive, just precise. "Is that correct?" The second officer's mouth tightened. He said nothing. The man took out a small notebook and wrote something down. The simple act seemed to land harder than any accusation. The first officer's radio crackled again, this time unmistakably urgent. "Unit 12, report status." The officer hesitated, then pressed the button. "Traffic stop. Situation under control," he said, the last words sounding more like a hope than a fact. The suited man glanced at the radio, then back at him. "Who's your supervisor tonight?" "That's not," the officer began. "I asked," the man said evenly. The officer gave the name. The man nodded and made another note. Then, without warning, he shifted his attention entirely. He turned to her, lowering his voice just enough to be respectful without being secretive. "When you made the call," he asked, "did you report the escalation?" "Yes," she said. "And the refusal to state cause?" "Good," he replied. "Then everything happening right now is already time-stamped." The first officer's face strained of color. "You recorded this?" the second officer blurted out. "No," she said. "Others did." As if on cue, someone across the street lifted their phone higher. Another person stepped closer, emboldened now. The balance of power had shifted not because of force, but because of visibility. The suited man took a step toward the patrol car, examining it like an exhibit. "Do either of you have body cameras active?" he asked. "Yes," the first officer said quickly. "Of course. Then we're aligned," the man replied. "Transparency protects everyone." The word transparency hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The first officer cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, who are you?" The man paused, considering the question. "Someone who doesn't like seeing procedures ignored," he said. "Someone who answers to people who take that seriously." That wasn't an answer, but it was enough. The second officer shifted his stance, unease written across his face. "Look," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe this got blown out of proportion. We can wrap this up, send her on her way." The man turned to him slowly. "That decision stopped being yours the moment this became public." The first officer's jaw clenched. "Are you threatening us?" "No," the man replied. "I'm observing." He reached into his jacket and removed his phone. He didn't dial immediately. He held it for a moment, eyes on the officers, giving them one last chance to choose their next move carefully. She watched quietly, her pulse steady. This was the part people never saw, the aftermath of restraint, the moment where dignity forced the truth to surface without shouting. The man finally placed the call. He spoke clearly, professionally, giving names, badge numbers, and location. He described what had occurred without embellishment. When he ended the call, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at the officers again. "You've both been instructed to stand down," he said. "A supervisor is en route." The first officer's mouth fell open slightly. "Stand down?" "Yes." "We didn't do anything wrong," The second officer snapped, panic creeping into his voice. The man's gaze hardened just a fraction. That will be determined shortly. Silence fell again, thick and unavoidable. The red and blue lights continued to flash, but now they felt exposed, theatrical. The officers stood awkwardly, hands at their sides, no longer commanding the scene. The crowd sensed it too. Murmurs spread, not angry, just aware. A few minutes later, headlights appeared at the far end of the street. A marked vehicle approached, slower than usual, deliberate. It pulled up behind the SUV, then stopped. A uniformed supervisor stepped out. The first officer straightened instinctively. "Sergeant!" "Not now," the supervisor said, holding up a hand. He surveyed the scene quickly, eyes sharp, taking in the phones, the bystanders, the tension. Then he looked at the suited man. "You called?" "Yes," the man replied. "Thank you for coming." The supervisor turned to the officers. "What's going on?" Before either could answer, the suited man spoke. "This stop escalated without cause. The driver requested clarification and badge numbers. The situation became confrontational." The supervisor's eyes narrowed. "Is that accurate?" The first officer hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. The supervisor sighed slowly. "All right," he said. "Everyone take a breath." He turned to her. "Ma'am, have you been informed why you were stopped?" "No," she replied. He nodded grimly. "That's a problem." The officers stared at the ground now. The second officer rubbed the back of his neck, sweat visible at his temple. The supervisor looked at the suited man again. "And you are?" The man paused just long enough for the moment to stretch. Then he said, "Her legal representative is already aware of this situation." That wasn't the reveal. Not yet. But it was close enough to make the officer's knees feel weak. She met the supervisor's gaze calmly. "I'd like this documented fully," she said. "It will be," he assured her. The supervisor turned back to the officers. "Step aside." They obeyed without argument. As they moved away, the suited man leaned slightly toward her. "We're almost there," he said quietly. She nodded once. The street buzzed with anticipation now. Whatever was about to happen felt inevitable. The officers knew it. The bystanders felt it. And she stood at the center of it all, composed, waiting, not for revenge, but for truth to finally speak for itself. The supervisor stood between the officers and the woman now, his presence firm and unmistakable. The street no longer felt like theirs to control. It belonged to the moment, to the truth that had been building quietly with every calm answer and every reckless assumption. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, lowering his voice slightly, "you're free to go. You were never given a lawful reason for detention." She didn't move right away. Not out of fear, but out of principle. "I understand," she said. "Before I leave, I'd like to ensure everything that occurred here is properly recorded." The supervisor nodded. "It will be. Body cameras, witness videos, dispatch logs. All of it." The two officers stood off to the side now, no longer close, no longer loud. Their shoulders were slumped, the confidence that had carried them earlier replaced by a tense, hollow stillness. The second officer kept glancing at the ground, as if the asphalt might open and swallow him. The first stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to meet her eyes. The suited man stepped closer to her, not touching, just present. "Are you comfortable staying a few more minutes?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied. "I am." The supervisor turned toward the officers. "I need both of you to remain here. Internal review has been notified." The word internal landed like a verdict. "We didn't." The first officer started, then stopped himself. His voice faltered. "We were just doing our job." The supervisor looked at him steadily. "Your job doesn't include escalating without cause." A patrol car pulled up slowly, then another. More uniforms stepped out, their expressions serious, professional. The crowd grew quieter, sensing this wasn't spectacle anymore. This was consequence. One of the new arrivals approached the suited man. "Sir," he said respectfully, "we'll need a brief statement." "Of course," the man replied. "She'll be providing one as well." The officer nodded and turned to her. "Ma'am?" She inhaled once, deeply, then spoke. Her voice carried without effort, not raised, not sharp. She described the stop, the questions unanswered, the orders given without explanation, the tone, the laughter, the crowd, the moment when restraint was met with hostility. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't editorialize. She simply told the truth. As she spoke, one of the officers winced. Another shook his head slowly, disbelief etched across his face, not at her words, but at his colleague's actions. When she finished, the supervisor cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said. "That was very clear." The suited man spoke next, adding details, timestamps, corroboration. He referenced the recordings already circulating online, the calls logged, the protocols violated. Every word tightened the net. The first officer finally looked up. His eyes met hers for the first time since the SUV arrived. There was no anger there now. Only the dawning realization that he had misjudged not just her, but the weight of his own authority. The supervisor turned back to her. "Ma'am, before we conclude, there's one more question we need to ask for the record." She nodded. "May we have your full name?" The street seemed to lean in. She gave it calmly, without emphasis, without flourish. The effect was immediate. One of the officers went still. Another's eyes widened slightly before he looked away. The supervisor's expression changed, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Recognition. Respect. Something bordering on disbelief. "Yes," the supervisor said after a moment. "I understand." The suited man stepped forward now, voice steady, carrying just enough for those closest to hear. "For clarity," he said, "she serves at the federal level." The silence that followed was absolute. The second officer's face went pale. "Federal?" he whispered, barely audible. The first officer swallowed hard. His shoulders sagged, the last trace of defiance draining out of him. He had mocked her composure, dismissed her questions, treated her presence like a challenge instead of what it was, the law itself, standing quietly in front of him. The supervisor straightened. "Thank you for your patience," he said to her. "I apologize for how this was handled." She met his gaze. "Apologies matter," she said. "But accountability matters more." "Yes," he replied. "It does." He turned sharply to the officers. "Both of you are relieved of duty pending investigation. Turn in your equipment." The words hit harder than any raised voice ever could. The first officer hesitated, then unclipped his radio with trembling hands. The second followed suit, movements clumsy, eyes fixed on the ground. They didn't argue. They didn't protest. They couldn't. As they handed over their gear, phones around the street lowered slightly. The crowd wasn't cheering. There was no triumph in the air. Only a quiet, heavy understanding that something important had just happened. She watched them for a moment, then turned toward her car. "Ma'am," the supervisor called gently. "One more thing." She paused. "You're welcome to file a formal complaint. Or pursue this further. That's entirely your right." She considered his words, then nodded. "I will," she said. "Not for me alone." He understood what she meant. She walked back to her car, movements unhurried. The flashing lights had stopped now. The street lights seemed softer somehow, less harsh. She opened the door, sat down, and closed it behind her. Before starting the engine, she looked once more through the windshield. The officers stood off to the side, smaller now, stripped of the certainty they'd worn like armor. The supervisor spoke quietly with others, already outlining next steps. The suited man waited nearby, giving her space. She started the car. As she pulled back onto the road, no one stopped her. No one questioned her. No one laughed. The street returned to its silence, but it was a different silence now. One shaped by truth instead of fear. And as she drove away into the night, she knew the lesson of that stop would travel farther than she ever could, etched into reports, recordings, and memories. Not because she demanded respect, but because she embodied the law so completely that it could no longer be ignored.